Hello, and welcome to another engaging episode of Stan the History Man. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Now, today I'd like to talk about English food of the 1950s. Now, of course, English food has a bad reputation. I'm sure it's better now since there's much more immigration there and so on. But still, and the reason I took the 1950s was that's right after the war, period of great austerity, and austerity in food as much as anything else. And I was over there after the war at that time in the 1950s with my parents, and so I remember the English food of that time. And it was as the story says, you boil the heck out of it, and like apparently when tea first came there, the English they boiled the tea and then poured off the tea and ate the grounds. So at any rate, but I want to talk about some good English food also, and that's not just totally negative. And of course, the symbol of let me talk about to keep finish off the negative. The English had things that I've never heard of and tried once. One would be baked beans on toast. That's what I said, baked beans on toast. I guess they like it. Another thing was they have a toast cooler. Now we Yanks like to keep our toast warm, warm buttered toast or hot buttered toast. No, they have these racks, like silver racks or stainless steel, and you put the toast in until it cools off, and then you eat it, butter it, and eat it. Another one was they had kind of dried peas, bachelor's peas, and that would be boiled, and then everything is boiled practically. Then you put it on a plate, and I remember that they had two things. They had green dye in it, and also a sprig of mint. So you'd see the dye running off away from the peas into your into your mashed potatoes. Not to mention mint with peas, but that probably is an American taste anyway. So that was some of the things that kidney pie. It didn't appeal to me. Uh, but one of the best things they had, is symbolic of England, of course, is fish and chips. Now it's kind of a upscale fast food places have fish and chips. Uh, but at that time, that was the basic food, especially during this age of austerity. And I remember there were like row houses, and one of those rows is converted to a fish and chip shop. And the fish would be boiled in artery clogging fat and wrapped in newspapers. The potatoes, the chips with that, and the fish itself. I'll tell you, I never tasted anything better. Whether I'm talking about a fish and chip place here or over there, it was the best. Just that hole in the wall little fish and chip place, and I really enjoyed it. It was almost like the staff of life because if they couldn't afford the fish, again, the age of austerity, they'd have the chips instead. They say, run out and get us a threepenny packet of chips. That's what 3 pence threepenny. Okay, they were of course long way from being on the metric system at that time. So English food, I think at that time certainly lived up to its reputation, except for fish and chips. And so I just want to talk about that. It was kind of symbolic also of the age of austerity, which would last from about 1949 to 1959. Thinking of, like, for example, what the English call sweets. They had wonderful sweet shops, far better than anything we have here. Another good thing about English food, by the way. Um, but it was rationed until 1954. That is 4 years after the war. They still were rationing it. Now, when the conservatives came in, they didn't like rationing that much. So they quickly got rid of it, but it lasted that long. English bread. English bread was very good. They had a rather small, cheap loaf called Havis, and it was the English didn't like it because it wasn't rich enough or sweet enough for them. But we Yanks kind of thought it was really kind of originally, certainly better than the so-called Wonder Bread that we have, where we grind out all the goodness and then add chemical nutrition to it. This was just all naturally good food. Um, Also, during the war, bread was not rationed, so they felt like even if you feel like you're just don't have enough food, you're hungry. Of course, many times they never starving, but they were hungry. Well, then fill up on food, on bread. After the war, the Labor government rationed bread, and that brought out quite an outcry. But they stuck to their guns. Not only did they uh, do what they didn't do during the war, ration bread. They didn't adulterate the bread during the war. After the war, they adulterate with some kind of a chalk substance. I guess nutritionists might say it's still a better loaf than the typical American loaf, but that's another story. Um, so after the war, you not only had the the, the, the remnants of the war, rebuilding and so on, but you also had this austerity imposed upon them, probably imposed too much. I think that there is an English attitude like that, we're austere. Certainly many of the leaders of the Labor government were that way. And in fact, they just didn't talk that, they walked it. I mean, Sir Stafford Cripps actually would eat carrots because the government was always pushing carrots because they're relatively cheap, and I don't think they were on ration after the war. But he was very ascetic, and he lived that way. Like, he would not fill his bathtub more than 3 inches of warm water. Of course, neither did the king. He also made it a point that we will follow the English rationing during and after the war. Although with the royal forest and so on, they could get a lot of game, which the average bloke couldn't get. So they weren't quite suffering. And they knew it. They weren't quite suffering as much as the average Englishman. Well, anyway, that's how I wanted to talk about sort of an interesting, odd thing that almost nobody knows about, because they say English food has a bad reputation. But I think right now, in fact, the pizza has come to it. When we were in England after the war, well after the war, in the 1960s, I doing studies over there, we could not get pizza anywhere. And here was a leading world city with 2 or 3 philharmonic orchestras and plays and whatever. You couldn't get pizza. Now I understand that I was told when I asked about an Englishman about it, he said Domino's delivers. So things have changed there. But it's kind of interesting and fun even to look back on English food during the 1950s, the age of austerity. Well, thank you very much for listening and watching. I'm Stan, the History Man, and I hope you're looking forward to another episode of the program. Bye-bye.